All right. Wednesdays, 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am your host, Discussions of Truth. This is Wynwood Radio. Shifting to a podcast platform in Wynwood. Stay tuned for that. Broadcasting remotely now as of a few months. Traveling around somewhat. Location, general velocity, vicinity rather. Okay, so a little bit of teaser there. Yes, in the news, the Kobe Bryant death, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, caught. It was about 9:45 a.m. Pacific time. His helicopter leased. He did not own the helicopter. His leased helicopter flew through fog into a hillside in Calabasas, Los Angeles County. And regardless of what one may think, certainly whether it's direct or indirect, the fault of a company or an aircraft, the sports world lost an incredible icon, an athlete that achieved heights that the NBA certainly has rarely seen, to the likes of course, not to have to repeat this, but Michael Jordan, I'd throw Bill Russell in there. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the all-time leading scorer in the NBA. And, of course, LeBron James, surprisingly, had just caught Kobe as number 3 on the all-time scoring list. So we're looking at world-class athletes, totally way above the skew as far as average NBA talent. This is just incredible talent on a scale that is rarely seen. There's a couple players out there. Zion Williams, I think, number 1 from Duke, playing for the Pelicans, is possibly another one of those once-in-a-generation talents. But at 41 years old, and his second oldest daughter, I believe, Gianna, at 13, both of them going down in an aircraft with 9 people on board. That includes the pilot. It seems odd to receive that news within 24 hours of seeing. So Kobe Bryant is a person and a name that is frequently in mass media, whether it's in sporting channels or him winning an Oscar recently, him being tried with sexual assault back in 2000, or tried, not convicted, back in 2004. He's a name that crossed many boundaries, so not uncommon to see his name in the news. But to see his name Saturday, and so much attention on him and handling the being passed, if you will, by LeBron James on that all-time scoring list, or as number 3, and he handling it so graciously. He, from outside appearances, he seemed like a fairly classy person, and which is rare, I think, in those heights of stardom or celebrity. But he seemed like a pretty decent individual, loving his family. So one has to definitely step back and say, okay, this seems odd. So regardless of theory, let's look at some of the facts here. Okay, and that's what we do on Discussion of Truth. We look at facts. Not all the time are we able to cross-check and name multiple sources to support certain facts. So then, therefore, the definition of what is a fact. Okay, well, the fact is that the sun shines, and the fact is that you're listening to this right now. The fact is, so there's different facts. So regardless of, but let's look at some of the facts here. So, coming up on Discussions of Truth, May 20th, based somewhat in Miami, author and journalist and attorney Gerald Posner will be joining the program. He's an investigative journalist, author, and former Wall Street attorney. He's a native of San Francisco, California. He was Phi Beta Kappa and summa cum laude graduate of Cal Berkeley. He was also a national debating champion at that time, winning the Mecklejohn Award. Posner went on to receive a JD from Hastings, UC Hastings. So he perhaps most notably of yet, as a New York Times bestseller, known for Case Closed, Lee Harvey Oswald, and the assassination of JFK. And we spoke a little bit about that last week with Jerry Croth. Gerald followed that book up with something called Killing the Dream, James Earl Ray, and the assassination of MLK, Martin Luther King. 2015, Posner released God's Bankers, A History of Money and Power at the Vatican. This work became Posner's third New York Times bestselling. By the way, Tom Hartman will be joining us later next month. He was ranked as the #1 progressive talk show host nationally a couple years ago. And he's got millions of listeners to his daily program. He'll be joining the program, Discuss the Truth, next month, late next month. Anyway, so going back to Posner, I'm going to tie this back into Kobe Bryant, so this will be interesting here. Merciless pitbull of an investigator is Posner, according to the Chicago Tribune. And what we're going to be talking about when Gerald joins us is his recent book, which will be coming out in March, Pharma. Actually, it may be May. Correction. Pharma, Greed, Lies, and the Poisoning of America, as it tackles corporate American pharmaceuticals. The book meaning Gerald. Listed in 2016 as number 52, I get this, of Deloitte's Fast 500 North America. One such company that comes under Posner's fire is the pharmaceutical Insys, Phoenix-based. Now, listen to this.
Oh, it's Kobe Bryant.
Help me.
Just pass me the trophies and we'll pull you out.
Pass. These were Shaq's.
Okay, so if you have been following some of the mainstream kind of angles at the Kobe Bryant catastrophe, I call it catastrophe, then you may have come across what I just played there, is the Grant DeKernian episode of Chamberlain Heights, aired by the Comedy Channel. Chamberlain Heights, I think that was a 2000, either 16 or 17 episode. And by the way, what's also interesting about the Kobe Bryant issue is that his former Deet, I think is his name, his former pilot that flew him for 2 years between like 15 and 2017 and 2017, was changed. I don't know the background on that, but this guy that died, the guy that was piloting the craft Sunday, was a guy that had kind of recently. Now, I haven't looked at the history of who flew Kobe Bryant, but certainly he had flown together with this Dietz guy, but for some reason this Dietz guy got taken off and it stopped flying in 17. And I think the pilot that flew Bryant Sunday had flown him at the same time as Dietz, but for some reason Dietz had been taken off and hadn't flown it for 2010. This is why this is interesting. So the Chamberlain Heights issue, and just Grant DeKernian is the writer for that episode. Comedy Central aired for a couple seasons. Chamberlain Heights, and what I'm getting at here is that in that episode, Bryant goes down. He crashes in his helicopter, and he's holding like 2 NBA trophies as the helicopter goes down, and that's in this 2017 episode of Chamberlain Heights. Okay, fast forward 2020, and Kobe Bryant dies in a downed helicopter. Okay, now there's also some sort of a toy. You can Google it. There's some sort of a toy, Kobe Bryant. I think it's Bryant, Durant, and LeBron James. All 3 of them have this kind of helicopter kind of outfit that they're wearing. These are toys. I don't know who made them. Okay, so I'm going to tie this back in here to Pharma, okay, which is very interesting. And of course, I want to mention Mila Demur, and Mila Demur was a Key West activist, okay, that was real big on the fabrication of mosquitoes. There's a Genentech's the name of it. There's Genentech, which is the name of it, and wait a second here. There's a Genentech, which is a British-owned mosquito GMO genetically modified mosquito manufacturing company. And she had gathered signatures, worked round the clock for years to get that thing closed down for various reasons, but she didn't want man-made mosquitoes flying around and biting her for whatever reason. You can kind of anyway. So she goes to D.C. This has been 2 years now. She goes to D.C. with the signatures. Well, she's the morning before she's supposed to meet with the EPA. She's found dead, floating in her hotel pool. So whether these are coincidences, I frankly don't believe in coincidences, or these are actual set up deaths that are likely virtually impossible to it's like the JFK, you still the Oswald era, but there's so many different. So there's so many different layers to getting at these. So let me just tie this Bryant story back into to Pharma, and we'll bring on today's guest, who is patiently waiting. Former VP of Sales Alec Burlikoff was accused of operating a program that paid doctors lucrative speaking fees to encourage prescriptions of the drug Subsys, made by Insys. This is in Posner's book, Pharma. A former attorney in Wall Street in 2017. Insys founder John Kapoor. Okay, keep that name fresh in your mind. John Kapoor had been charged with a RICO conspiracy and conspiracy to violate anti-kickback laws. Okay. Now, just recently, like within the past week and a half, he was convicted and he's now sitting trial, he's now in prison 5.5 years. Okay, and whether that has to do with Posner's work or not, my guess is it certainly does. Okay, there's a tie-in here. Okay, so for Posner coming on, get that date for you, May 20th. For Posner coming on, he's regularly contributed to NBC, History Channel, CNN, Fox News, CBS, and MSNBC. He's a member of New York and D.C. bars, as well as the International Criminal Court. Okay, so let me break this down for you, then I'll bring on today's guest. Gerald Posner has written the book Pharma. John Kapoor, which I just mentioned, you keep that name in mind. John Kapoor, okay, tried and now convicted and serving time in prison. This is of like 2 weeks ago. RICO and kickback laws. Is the founder and owner of Insys. Okay, he's founder and owner of Insys. He was also the largest shareholder, and according to the Wikipedia page, which isn't always that accurate, he's considered a, quote, founder. According to who, I don't know, but that means he's the largest shareholder. No, he didn't found it, but he's considered a founder for a company called Acorn Pharmaceuticals. Acorn Pharmaceuticals is the parent company of High-Tech Pharmaceuticals, acquired in 2013. High-Tech Pharmaceuticals is owned by Acorn. John Kapoor, the same guy that owns Insys, is now in prison for RICO charges, also owned Acorn, which means he also owned and still does, even though he's in prison likely, owns high-tech. Why is this important? In 2015, the name Black Mamba Hyper Rush was trademarked, or an attempt to make to get it trademarked. Kobe Bryant took high-tech pharmaceutical to court. And the battle is still going on, and it's supposed to go to trial. In 2016, U.S. patent Black Mamba was denied by the patent office in D.C. for Kobe Bryant. Okay. Kobe's angle to high tech was that they were using illegal drugs. They were distributing illegal drugs. Prohibitive substances by the FDA were found in high-tech products. Black Mamba Hyper Rush. These products, according to Bryant and his team, the DMAA and methicillin epinephrine, and feel free to leave me a voice memo if I've mispronounced that. Okay, those two drugs is what was Bryant's team's suit against high-tech, owned by John Kapoor, now in prison for RICO charges. Okay, I just broke that down to you. So, is that coincidence? Is it coincidence? Is it coincidence that Melody Moore, a mother of two in Key West, was found floating dead in a pool in D.C. as she attempted to collect or to meet with the EPA regarding a British mosquito manufacturing plant down in Key. I don't know which Key it was. Okay, so that's some interesting things. You can couple the Comedy Central forecast of Kobe going down in a helicopter, not necessarily dying, but going down in a helicopter crash. Couple that with the fact that Bryant had, sexual assault charges way back in 2004. That's fine. And it didn't seem to have any relevance in his recent death. But just recently, John Kapoor, like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, was convicted and found guilty. He's now serving time in prison for RICO charges. And his company is the same company that Bryant is battling a court case with. High-tech pharmaceutical. Break it down. Akron and John Kapoor. Okay, so that's my angle on the Kobe Bryant thing. Today, we have Josh Reeves on board and will be joining us. And he will be discussing the global reality show, which he bases out of Dallas, Texas. Next week, Russ Brown will be joining us. If you're not familiar with him, I'll break him down for you at the end of the show. Let's bring on Josh right now.
Hello.
Mr. Josh Reeves.
That's me. I'm here.
Welcome to Discuss Your Truth. I am Ian Trottier. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Josh, so for listeners out there who may not be familiar with your work, the Global Reality Show is what you work on out of Dallas. Tell us a little bit about it, and tell us a little bit about you, sir.
Well, I first started my show in 2007. I had been doing activism and research for many years, and doing at that time it was even before podcasting was a thing. It was just on shoutcast streams, internet streams, and stuff like that. So I started the show out as a 1-hour show in 2007, and then that also coincided with the release of my first documentary film, because I also make documentary films on these subjects as well. And I've been going ever since. I was on a bunch of networks, and then until 2009, and then I started my own platform, and been going ever since. So I also, like I said, I've released 6 full-length documentaries. I've got 2 more that are coming very soon, and I've just been doing many years of research and talking about this stuff and getting into a whole lot of different topics. So it's great to be here with you, Ian.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that as well. So for listeners that may not be familiar with the latest documentary that you've created, Tobias Churchton, I'm not sure you're familiar with him, but he's an Oxford graduate. He has. We've actually had him schedule on the program, and then we've had to reschedule him. But not sure it has any relevance in your recent documentary. But your recent documentary is called Spellcasters. Tell us a little bit about what that is.
Well, yeah, that's it actually came out a few years ago, and I've been having part 2 and part 3 kind of on the back burner, and have been in the making, and they're almost completed now. But essentially, what it is it was started out as an exploration into who controls Hollywood, because I'd gotten that question many times, and then it turned into a much larger exploration of not only who controls Hollywood, but also who's been behind a lot of the so-called conspiracy stuff that's come out for many years. It gets into Scientology, MK Ultra, the large amount of confluence of various things that happened in the year 1947, and goes through a various exploration of that. And then 2 and 3 are going to be dealing largely with music, the just decades of music conspiracies, suspicious deaths, fake deaths, that whole thing. So it's a very interesting thing to delve into, because it's one of those things where, like I said, where you start out with one premise. I started out with just an exploration of Hollywood and who controls it, and wound up down a much darker and deeper rabbit hole. So that's really what the film explores and gets into.
Yeah, that's cool. So I've got in my hand here. She'll be joining the program in about a month and a half. A book called The Hidden Nature of Finance. The Hidden Nature of Finance Sabotage. Anastasia Nesvetlova. She's a professor of international political economy at the University of London. She's author of many works in financial system. She's not the first person to come out on my program. Certainly not that she's coming out on the program, but she's not the first person to join the program that's been a very high ranking former either economist or money manager. Nomi Prinz, a former Goldman Sachs executive, joined the program. More and more today, and I don't think this has anything to do with Trump, but more and more today, what we're seeing are very high level people, whistleblowers really is what they are, and that are saying, okay, yes, the banking system globally is completely and totally corrupt. There is a global banking cartel. Call it the New World Order, whatever it may be. There is a global banking cartel. But to funnel that down to what you're getting at, you started with Hollywood, and that's a pretty interesting area. Why don't you tell listeners what got you looking into some funky business going on in Hollywood? What was it that grabbed your eye and spawned this? Go ahead.
Well, you'd have to go back actually to some of my earlier films, which was my second and third films that I ever made, called The Secret Right Volume 1 and The Secret Right Volume 2, which it came about because of me finding out about a secretive right-wing group back in 2007 called the Council for National Policy, the CNP. And during this exploration into this group and looking into who controls the group, it brought about this much larger question of really who controls the world and who controls everything. And so, speaking on what you're talking about with the bankers, one of the things that I uncovered during the research into that film was connections into, because a lot of people know, or a lot of people believe, okay, hey, left, right, whatever, it's all controlled by the same people. But it's one thing to say that, but it's one very different thing to actually find that out. And that's one of the things I found out during the making of that film, was going back and finding out that all these groups, whether you're talking about the Council for National Policy on the right, or whether you're talking about the Council on Foreign Relations on the left, or any of these groups, they all their money and all their funding traces back to Central European bankers, and it goes back to groups like the Milner's Roundtable groups, the Fabian Society, which is big on both the left and the right, and these are all controlled by Central European bankers, the Rothschilds, etc. So what you find out is that all of these groups, whether they're on the left or on the right in American politics, their money always traces back to the Central European bankers, etc. So because I'd already done the exploration into that, the question of who controls Hollywood came up, and that led to this much larger deep dive into finding out. And I can't say I can't ever really give you a definitive answer on that, but largely after when I explored this in the film The Spellcasters, after the McCarthy era, and after you had people being labeled as communists and everything else, you started to have a real grip by the CIA and by the government, who had interest in being able to sell agendas, sell wars, sell anything else they wanted to, through the control of television media and the rest of it. So it's just another extension of what you were talking about there with, you could say, okay, you've got the bankers and you've got their control on this other end, but how do they do this on other levels, and how do they extend that control through it? And I think Hollywood TV and mass media in general, as everybody I'm sure probably knows at this point, is a major part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was able to trace back and what got me going on this, so that was being exposed in Miami, being exposed to the Zika virus with a very controversial neurotoxic pesticide that was banned in Europe, that was basically forced by Rick Scott to be used in Miami-Dade. And I drew a connection in that the Rockefellers owned a patent, and you can find this online. You can, if you've got the proper credentials, you can actually order a vial of the Zika virus. ATCC, I believe, out of the UK is the lab. They own the patent on the Zika virus that discovered in the 1940s, and they also own the largest shareholders of Chevron Chemical Corporation, which developed the mosquito pesticide called Dibrom. So that kind of got me going, and then I found a guy named Anthony Sutton. Are you familiar with the work of Anthony Sutton?
No, I'm not.
So Anthony Sutton is a former Stanford Hoover Fellow, and Anthony Sutton dives down, and I'm sure you are familiar with Skull and Bone Society and the lodge there at Yale, that Anthony Sutton exposes their ties to Germany. And
through Bayer and Bayer Pharmaceuticals and all that. Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, IG Farb, and then he exposes Prescott Bush, and this is being done in like the 70s.
Right.
So he gave in Miami Beach. He gave a conference of his research in 1972. This is 1972. He's kind of bringing this stuff to light. That Prescott Bush is the banker. And of course, he had previously been tried in D.C. Prescott Bush had, but he's bringing this stuff to light, and he returns back to Palo Alto, and they basically they say if you open your mouth, if you divulge this information again, you'll be expelled from Stanford. And so he ends up leaving, and then he finds a publisher, and he starts self-publishing, and he uses a small independent publisher to get his work written. But what's interesting here is that it's sometimes difficult. It's sometimes difficult for the average American, because, like you are saying, and I want you to talk a little bit more about this organization that you discovered. What comes to my mind, Josh, is the CFR. And the Council on Foreign Relations is basically a political media group, think tank, if you will, but it's based in New York City. It's not based in D.C. And that has strong ties. It was basically started by the Rockefeller Foundation, and what they have done is they have completely and totally manipulated mainstream media. How do you see this being manipulated in Hollywood? How is Hollywood manipulated in your, from what you have researched?
Well, it like I said before, it generally comes from the CIA's control over that. But going back to what you were talking to just a minute ago, with the Rockefellers and their control over and the whole pesticide thing. I mean, a lot of people may or may not know that the Rockefeller controlled Chase Manhattan Bank has had offices inside every major pharmaceutical and medical company in the world for literally decades. So they're big players in controlling, as you said, not only the stuff that gets put out there that makes people sick, but also stock in the companies that provide the so-called cures and the rest of it. But with the CFR, what's interesting is you are correct. They were a Rockefeller-funded group. But when I first started my show in 2007, I had much of the same views that you do, Ian, and I thought that this was largely just I was just kind of curious as to why it seemed like a lot of the conspiracy stuff was mostly focusing on the left wing, and I'd seen stuff on the right wing. And then when I got into researching the Council for National Policy, I started finding out that you had members, at least in the early days when that group first started in the early 1980s, you had people that were members in the Council for National Policy that were also members in the Council on Foreign Relations. So this is when the idea that, again, left, right, this is all front for the public. These guys are all working together in the background. And this is what led me to make, as you talked about, the Spellcasters film, where I continued to find more connections to people within Scientology, people with connections within the Council for National Policy, the CIA, etc. So when you start to realize that no matter what side of the aisle these guys are on, that they're all pretty much involved in the same stuff, it really is an eye-opener.
Yeah, the other thing that you should know about Sutton is that Sutton claims in his books that the Soviet Union was deliberately built up by the U.S. or those funding the U.S. To create an enemy. So he writes a book called the best enemy money can buy.
Absolutely, he's absolutely correct. I'd just like to comment on that because that's something I actually just talked about on my own show yesterday. That's absolutely correct. A lot of people might shake their head at that and not understand, and not that during the height of the so-called Cold War and during that whole era, the United States, even going back prior to that, even during prior to the Kennedy assassination, this is why you had Oswald running around Russia and being able to go back and forth between Russia and the United States with no problem, because yesterday on my own show, I talked about the story that came out in the news this week about how they have recently found that there was this fourth so-called Russian spy who was working at Los Alamos Nuclear Laboratory during the development of nuclear weapons, and they were trying to spin this idea that this person was a spy and not actually put there intentionally to share the data with the Russians intentionally. And then it came out that these blueprints, the original blueprints that they made for the nuclear weapons at Los Alamos Nuclear Laboratory, were made originally both in English and Russian. Now, why would you make blueprints for a nuclear weapon? Why would you have Russian translations for those unless you were planning on actually sharing those? And that's another thing I found out during my Spellcasters research, was looking into Scientology and how these so-called auditing sessions that they use are actual, they're actual intelligence gathering sessions, and how L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology would actually take a lot of the U.S. secrets and then sell them to the Russians through the back door. And because of L. Ron Hubbard's association with the OSS and then later the CIA, and how there's so many correlations between what you read in the MK Ultra mind control documents and what became Scientology. Again, I show all this in the film, The Spellcasters. That is really what led me to finding out that we have actually, all that stuff about the Cold War and the Russians being our enemy, that was all created. We've been sharing information with them and actually creating that enemy for many years, just like we did with Saddam Hussein when we set him up in Saudi Arabia in like 59. So I just wanted to explanate on that because it is a real thing. People should look into it.
Yeah, and that's essentially so. In your view, how does this play into Hitler? Who funded and built Hitler? We know the Americans did. The Rockefellers certainly did. They funded. They flew the Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force, was deliberately designed that they had to use tetraethyl, which was a Rockefeller patent. Their planes could only run on tetraethyl. So sometimes what I like to say is that I like to tell people, I say, hey, when the Germans were running planes and bombing London, that was American fuel. They were doing that, and the Americans knew that. Well, not all the Americans, but the cartel, if you will, of the Americans knew that that was happening, right? And,
the Rothschilds, absolutely. The Rothschilds and the Central European bankers, absolutely. The Rothschilds were funding. That was all a big conglomerate thing. They were all working together. You're absolutely correct. But the Rothschilds, Rothschilds were funding Hitler for the extermination of the Sephardic Jews. That's why they were exterminating only the lower classes and mostly the dark-skinned Sephardic Jews, and they were meanwhile leaving alone the Ashkenazi type of Jews like the Rothschilds and such that those come from. And so basically, we set him up just like I said before, just like we set up Saddam Hussein, etc. But much in the same way as Saddam Hussein, once Hitler started to get way too much power and it started getting beyond their control, that's when they wanted to call in and have him shut down. There's been a lot in the press recently, Ian, and I talked about on my show, a lot of people making fun of the Trump Space Force logo and saying that, this is a ripoff of Star Trek. Well, those people are actually uninformed. If you actually go back and research this stuff and find out it's actually the other way around, that would probably blow people's minds. But the science advisors on the original Star Trek series were Werner von Braun and several of the paperclip Nazis that went on to later work on NASA here in the United States, were the original science advisors on the Star Trek series. This is because they supposedly, again, this is just, this is rumor and conjecture. This isn't really anything anybody knows for sure. But the rumor and the theory is that somehow the Nazis had gotten control of some extraterrestrial craft. They had back engineered this and started to create all kinds of technology like phaser weapons, hyperdrives. They even were creating their own fleet of UFOs. That's a fact. BMW actually came out with the blueprints where BMW Motor Company was actually making the engines for Hitler's UFO fleet. And again, these were the people who were the advisors on the original Star Trek series. So all this United Federation of Planets and all this stuff, this was already in the making then. So this is something that's been slowly being rolled out over the decades, not something that's just come up. So all the people that are saying, oh, yeah, Trump ripped off Star Trek. No. Bigger than that.
Yeah. So what you're talking about for listeners, this is Operation Paperclip, where I don't know what the total is. It seems like a number of the high level scientists, German scientists, were extradited to live in the United States. And Werner von Braun, who's basically he's a founder, one of the founders of the current NASA program,
yes.
is one of those people. And what I did not know is that he was involved in writing the early Star Trek series.
Yeah, well, he wasn't. I don't know if there was actually any writing involved. I just know that for sure they were the science advisors on that. So everything that they were looking for to make plausible for how futuristic technology would play out, yes, absolutely did come from the Paperclip Nazis. And the other interesting thing, Ian, that I uncovered in my Spellcasters Volume 1 film that people can see in that film is that what later became the MK Ultra mind control program by the CIA in the United States was actually started by the Nazis, and it was a program where they were using psychedelic drugs like LSD to try to create robotically controlled super soldiers. They were trying to use black magic. They were using black magic and psychedelic drugs to create these what they wanted to be mind-controlled super soldiers. That information, when we brought, as you said, the best and the brightest of the scientists, all the top engineers over to the United States during Project Paperclip, that information came over with them and is what began the MK Ultra program, and L. Ron Hubbard was very much involved in that.
So now you talk about black magic, and of course your latest documentary is Spellcasters. What do you mean when you say black magic?
Well, that comes from actually where I got that from. I actually got that from some interviews that L. Ron Hubbard Jr. had done, I believe, in the 1970s and 1980s, and he really went in. They were wanting this guy to be the next L. Ron Hubbard. They were wanting him to be the heir to the throne, and he started seeing what was going on during these auditing sessions and what was going on in within Scientology, and that's when in this interview he revealed that it's black magic, dark magic, summoning basically what they call thetans, and what they believe are these things that humans have trapped inside of us that they believe they can expunge out by you giving them thousands of dollars for these auditing sessions, are in fact they believe are demonic entities that have attached themselves to people and that they can actually control these things and use these things. The Nazis believe this too. It sounds crazy, it sounds kooky, but that's what we brought over here, and they started trying to figure out how to use that in the MK Ultra mind control program. L. Ron Hubbard said, oh, wait a minute, I can use this. He started taking bits of that and started using that to control and form and create Dianetics. So L. Ron Hubbard Jr.'s testimony is that he says at the highest levels that Scientology is absolute black magic. It's absolutely controlling these entities and calling up these entities within people that over a period of time, eventually once you get to the highest level, you're not even a conscious operating human anymore. You are essentially an entity that is fully controlled by these thetans and these demonic energies. So it's fascinating stuff, and I talk about all that in the Spellcasters film.
And this is what L. Ron Hubbard is saying?
That's what his son, his L. Ron Hubbard Jr., like I said, L. Ron Hubbard's son was the heir to the throne of Scientology. Once he started seeing that the real root and basis of Scientology is black magic and demon conjuring, he got out of it, renounced it. I think they ended up, I can't remember how he died under some real suspicious circumstances. It made it look like a suicide when it wasn't. So it's very interesting stuff when you look at what his son was actually saying, and that Scientology had a big anti-drug thing, and of course they're known for Al-Anon and all these different anti-drug things. But his son also went on the record to talk about, how L. Ron Hubbard was drugs were a huge part of this, and a huge part of these various black magic sessions and whatnot they were doing within Scientology. And this, again, that goes back to exactly what the Nazis were doing when they were trying to create their robotically controlled super soldiers using these psychedelic drugs.
So it sounds like, from what you're saying regarding the research you've done on the Nazis and then L. Ron Hubbard and the link there, and this black notion of black magic from what you've read, is that literally people are able to, they're selling their souls. Is that correct?
Essentially that's what it is. Yeah, but they don't even know they're doing it, and they under the guise, they're doing it under the guise of it's being freed. They're being led to believe that they have these thetans, these body thetans, these things that are attached, that are causing them to have, whatever it be, whether the suffering is in their life or whether it's mental things, and that through these various auditing things, they can actually, over time, you pay more money, it costs more, and then over time, they eventually make you clear, which means you no longer have these body thetans attached to you, when in reality, from the way L. Ron Hubbard Jr. makes it sound, it's the other way around. Essentially, it is the higher you go up the level, the more you become controlled, to the point to where you get to the highest OT level. You're essentially not even a real person anymore. You're, as you said, a fully controlled person by demonic entities, yes.
And have you found any parallels to some of these controversial, like a Tupac Shakur, some of these controversial celebrity deaths?
Well, the thing I found during with celebrity deaths is that so many of them appear to be, like you said, murders or suicides. The thing I found continuously, specifically with Tupac, and I've even found some now with Kurt Cobain, is that a lot of these so-called deaths that we're told are deaths, and then you have contrary conspiracy theories that come out around them, and yet what you continue to see is that the real deeper conspiracy theories, such as, let's say, Tupac faking his own death, those things, whenever you have TV shows, that theory never gets interplayed. It's always about, well, who killed him? It was somebody. He's really dead, so let's find out who it was. But the evidence that you come across when you start looking into, the Tupac faking his death is very interesting, because you've had, what's his name, Suge Knight multiple times. There's multiple videos out there. A lot of them have been scrubbed from the internet now, but there's multiple times where Suge Knight talks about that he faked his death, and he helped him do it because there was word coming down that they were going to kill him. There's also I don't know if you've ever seen the video of you had crisis actors on the scene at Tupac's death. You had this lady who was claiming that they saw a helicopter that came down and landed and took Tupac away. She's now come out, and she's a television actress on one of those like home remodeling shows. She's an actress on that. There's lots of stuff that has come out since then that indicates that, yeah, there was dummy used. I mean, especially if you look at the famous picture, the famous last picture of Tupac sitting in the car with Suge Knight. If you look closely and zoom in on that supposedly was taken minutes before he was shot, taken by somebody in a car. But if you look closely in there's no keys in the ignition of that car. You can see clearly that that is a stage photo, and that wasn't taken on the road with anybody driving. The keys aren't even in the ignition at all. That was a stage photo. So there's lots of interesting stuff like that, and that correlates with many of these things that the CIA has done for many years on faking people's deaths, and so I started to find the correlations between that and these various musicians and whatnot, and it goes back for decades. This is the stuff that's going to be coming in my new Spellcasters 2 and 3 films that are going to be coming out this year.
If Josh, if his death is faked, if the CIA has faked his death, why would the CIA want to fake his death?
Supposedly because from what I understand, he had already been working with the CIA prior to that. From what I understand, him and the actress, oh gosh, well, I can't believe I'm going to draw a blank on this. She's the actress that used to be, oh gosh, I can't remember her name now. It was his girlfriend. They both came out of this same art school in Baltimore, where the CIA recruits out of. So supposedly, from what I understand, he was already working with the CIA even prior to his death, and that when word came down that he was going to be murdered, because what happened is that you had these guys at at Interscope Records, the top guys at Interscope Records. And when he was put in prison, after he was shot, Suge Knight went in and got him out of prison, signed him to Death Row Records. And then you had all these guys who were, losing millions and millions of dollars on it. And so it's interesting that after his supposed death, that his estate went to his mother, Tupac's mother, and then who was also a Black Panther, and the Black Panthers were working with the CIA and whatnot. When she passed away, the Tupac estate went to one of the guys at Interscope Records. He now controls the entire Tupac estate. One of the guys that was stood to lose millions from his death now controls the entire estate. So again, that's just scratching the surface. There's not very much of that, here that I can give people to grab onto. But when you start looking into this and you start finding out that a lot of these people were working directly with the CIA for whatever interest it might be, particularly usually in the music industry, it's because they have some kind of mind that they believe they can use for various projects. Things like stuff similar to what you've seen in like the X-Men movies with Cerebro, when you see Professor X put on this device that allows him to see all these different people. Supposedly within MK Ultra, they like to use a lot of very smart people's brains to use these kind of devices that are sort of like remote viewing devices, where they can use them to see long range across distances and whatnot. Whether or not Tupac was involved in something like that, I don't know, but there has been a lot of stories that have gone around about their interest in certain people within the music industry and whatnot that have these type of minds that they can use in these devices.
So, Josh, in regards to a kind of a hot topic, a national hot topic, and this is really an international thing. We've got the coronavirus now. We've got a passenger plane and we're jumping around, and that's okay because
sure.
it all kind of ties back to money.
It all connects. Yep.
It all kind of ties.
Yep.
So
sure does.
So it's okay to jump around if you tie it back to who's running the finances, and that's what we're doing here. But in regards to this plane now that took a pit stop in Anchorage and is now, I think I don't know if it's scheduled to land at some point today in Riverside, in a military base in Riverside, carrying, I think it's 200 people that left Wuhan. And if you looking at all the ties through the pharmaceutical companies, and then what you're saying with MK Ultra, and then you've mentioned Bayer, which is basically a smaller company that came when IG Farben broke up in Germany, World War II. It broke off into various companies. Bayer is one of them. But we take into consideration these, and this is where I kind of come back on the foundation that I've built in regards to being exposed to this pesticide called dibrom, which was is currently banned by the European Union. Yet it was, like I said, it was basically forced from the CDC and Rick Scott to be used in Miami-Dade, exposing these pregnant women and exposing people, of course, in Miami Beach and Wynwood. So again, we've got this kind of red alert, possible world epidemic, Zika virus, in Brazil, and now it's come ashore. I think there was a couple cases in San Diego after it hit Miami. But we're facing this again with the coronavirus. Now, I don't know how much you've looked into the coronavirus, but there's different variations of SARS and the corona. But the Wuhan laboratory is, from what I've read, the only laboratory, or the highest level laboratory in China that deals with biological warfare, weapons of warfare. It's not saying that coronavirus is a biological weapon of warfare, but it certainly has that kind of possibility of becoming a global epidemic. And if we thread into this, Josh, and California's passed it, New York has passed it, these mandatory vaccinations, on various levels for, I think it's public schools right now in California. What are your thoughts in regard to that? I know I've mentioned a lot of things out there for you, but what are your thoughts in regards to the coronavirus?
Well, listen, I've agreed with pretty much everything you said, and I think you probably believe this more than you're saying, but I'm going to go ahead and say it right now for you, and I believe 100% it actually absolutely is a bioweapon. I've been covering this story and following it since even before it really broke out big. And one of the most recent stories that I covered was how one of the guys that worked at that bioweapons lab there in Wuhan, actually they ran all sorts of statistical analysis 6 months ago. Just last year, they ran all sorts of stuff, computer models and simulations on how many an outbreak of this particular coronavirus, how many people it would kill. So because of whenever you look at any of these outbreaks, they all tend to come, no matter what they are, they all tend to come from stage 5 bioweapons facilities. You can even talk about Lyme disease here in the United States and how that broke out on the East Coast from the stage 5 bioweapons lab at Fort Detrick, Maryland, back in the 1970s. I mean, this is something that's a regular thing that's happened. They've been planning for this. This is something where, again, the timing of these things is always what gets me, Ian. You know, and this happening during an election year, the timing of this is just very suspect. This happening during, all this other stuff that's happened to be going on. But absolutely, you're correct that it's the same old thing, the Hegelian dialectic over and over again, where they create a problem and then in the ensuing chaos come in and offer the solution. And as you said, the solution they want to offer us is this, the jab, the cure, whatever they're going to come up with for the coronavirus. And of course, that'll be, what they tell us is our savior and everything else. But who really stands to gain the most from this? The pharmaceutical companies, right. The people that are making this. It's multiple billion dollars a year industry, and all the top leaders and all the top countries are paid off to turn their back to this stuff and allow these type of outbreaks and stuff to happen. So this is nothing new. The real question of it is how far it's going to be allowed to go before they clip it off on some of the other ones that we've been fear-mongered about in the past. Some of the ones you brought up as well. You know, you had the bird flu, you had swine flu, you had all these different ones. I think this one is definitely something that they've been planning for a while, and I think they're planning on killing way more with this. The interesting thing about it is how, even some of the stories that have come out in the mainstream media have called this thing a bioweapon because of the way that the way that it interacts. I mean, the way that jumps between animals and humans is not something they've ever seen before. When they look at it under the microscope, they've been able to see telltale markers that this thing has been engineered. So I think they're definitely, I think that my whole thing is that I think you always have to be concerned about this kind of stuff. But I think there's a definite line between the fear mongering. How much should we be concerned about this versus should we just think this is another engineered thing to get everybody scared and everybody worried, particularly during a time when you've got a volatile election season coming up with Trump up for re-election and stuff that's going on with the impeachment stuff and all that. So, I think people should take a measured concern with this. If it starts to get into your local community in a big way, okay, then you might want to be concerned about it. But I've seen too much stuff happen, especially just during my 12, 13 years now on air with all of these different viruses that have broken out, where they're engineering them to kill people, and then they want to tell us that, okay, this is just some natural thing that happened, yet they always seem to have the cure and everything waiting there. I just think there's a big sort of disparity between how much, what should we believe, how scared should we be, or should we not be scared at all? And again, stuff like this happening during the election season has always seemed suspect to me.
Yeah, and the ultimate goal here, of course, is to not to think that this isn't a threat, because it's
sure,
definitely a threat, but to obviously think about, okay, is it possibly a designed threat? And if it is a designed threat, and while you still have the opportunity to question and not be it's not illegal to question whether it's a threat.
Not yet.
Right, exactly. So while we still have that opportunity to question if it is a threat, we still have the sort of free media, if you will, to question it. Right, not to say that it's not a threat, but to question it. Go ahead.
I go where you're going, Ian. Like you said before, when you were talking about your experience with the Zika virus stuff, and you saw how that happened, and you saw how that played out, I'm sure when this coronavirus thing started coming out and started playing out, immediately the first thing in your head was probably, oh, I've seen this before. Am I right?
That's exactly right, Josh.
And that's the thing that we see. They tend to run a lot of these same operations over and over again. They tend to run them the same way. But I think, like I said, I think it's very important that we try to understand exactly what this is, if this is a controlled release and who's doing it. And again, you don't have to live in fear and live to worry about whether you're going to die about this, but you also don't have to stick your head in the sand like an ostrich and ignore it and not look at the evidence if it's there that this is some sort of depopulation controlled outbreak, which I believe it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. There's this fear mongering that goes on, and it's not just not just is the Taliban going to attack and blow up a major
Right.
bridge, but the fact of the matter is there's enough Americans out there that are willing to to pull up their pants and fight. And the way you fight is not a physical. You're not going to take on any military, but you are
No.
perhaps going to what you've been doing for 13 years is dissect the problem and get to it from a factual point and
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a fight that takes place on multiple fronts. You're 100% correct. It's not just one front to this war. It's mind, body, and soul. It's everything. And so there are different elements that you can talk about within all three of those. And as you said before, it's all relevant. All this stuff connects together. So that's one of the things that's been my big calling card with all of my work that I've done in all my films and everything I've talked about through the years is I'm trying to make people understand that it doesn't matter what particular issue you choose to focus on or choose to research on. What is important is that you understand is that one isn't any less important than the other. And as you said, they all interconnect. And this is the thing that people need to understand. So that's why it's great that there's so many outlets out there like myself, you, where people can hear all these different things because there's so much. No one person can ever cover all of it. And as you said, it all interconnects and it's all relevant.
Yeah, follow the money. Former CIA analyst Ray McGovern has said on this program, and I like to repeat this, so give me a minute here, Josh, and let me repeat it. Ian, we no longer have any real sense of free media. The only hope now is people like you, and that would be you, Josh, who can repair the damage, and those listening as well, damage, and get people listening to people who know what they're talking about. And this is a guy that hand wrote the briefings for I think it was Reagan and Bush in the 80s. That's how high up he was in the CIA, and he's recently come out in the past couple decades, at least a decade and a half, and he's said the CIA, there's too much corruption in the CIA, it needs to be got out. But that goes back to the JFK quote, doesn't it? And even when JFK said he was going to obliterate the CIA. So even in JFK in the 60s knew exactly what was going on. And like you've said, this has been compounding for decades. This isn't something that was just recently designed. This has been designed likely over 100 years. So with that said, and as we dwindle down, as time is running low, Josh, how do you view, because look, we as a nation, regardless of your heritage, we were born through freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of speech, and that rooted through England. And if we look at the British history, they also had independentized themselves from the Roman Empire, just like the French and but the last stronghold of the Holy Roman Empire was Germany. How do you see the Vatican's role in all of this?
Well, oh gosh, we have no time to get into that massive question. But no, you're absolutely right. What I call it is the priest class, Ian. This goes back to the earliest civilizations on Earth. You can go back to even Sumeria, Acadia, Babylon, the earliest post-flood civilizations that popped up across the planet. What you tend to have through all these civilizations, whether you're talking about the Sumerians or whether you're talking about the Persians or whatever it may be, you have this divine right to rule, the priest class, where in the old days you didn't have, in the early days of Sumeria, you didn't have governors and chancellors and congressmen and all this. You had the priests. These were the people who had the closest connection with the spiritual world. And this is where the first secret societies and religions and whatnot were created. It was originally supposed to be created to teach mankind who we are, where we come from, and what our destiny on this planet is. And it eventually became, when people started to realize, oh, wait a minute, we have not a lot of knowledge here. We have a lot of knowledge here. We don't have to share all of it with the public. We can just give them a little bit of it. We keep the rest to ourselves, and we can gain a tremendous amount of power through that. So whether you're talking about the Vatican, the Jesuits, whether you're talking about any of these groups, it's the priest class. They have been there since the beginning. And when I did my exploration into the Council for National Policy that I talked about in my Secret Right films, that was the thing that I kept going back and back and back, and I kept finding this control through religion and through these different groups, and that's what the Council for National Policy is all about. They're controlled through all these groups like the Knights of Malta and the rest of it. So when you go farther and farther back, that's what you realize, is that no matter what nation it was from the beginning to the present, they are all controlled by these priestly classes of people that have knowledge and information they're keeping from the general public by giving us little bits to keep their society in place. They want it to go and keep it perpetuating itself indefinitely into the future.
So again, follow the money and follow it generationally, and it goes back, as you've just mentioned, as you've alluded to, Josh, it goes back centuries, and very likely many, many centuries. And so if we say that, then we understand exactly why the founding fathers of this nation set down the principles that they did. So, Josh, as we close out, what's the best foot forward for Americans?
I think just the same thing that's been for a long time, which I think is more important now than it ever has been, is to get informed, get yourself truly informed, not just what the mainstream media or even alternative media is telling you, but get real facts on what's going on. Find out who's really controlling these people, even if it's somebody in a political camp that you support, like Trump or somebody like that. Just find out the real truth. Arm yourself with knowledge and information that no one can take away from you. And I think that's going to be an indispensable tool as we move forward and as they continue to do more of these things to attempt to control mankind.
Excellent. Josh, thanks for joining the program, ladies and gentlemen. Josh Reeves. Josh, where can listeners find your work, your website?
You go to my website, theglobalreality.com. If you click in the middle, there's a thing that says purchase all of Josh Reeves films here. There's a download shop there. They can find me on YouTube, and they can find me on social media on Facebook, the Global Reality Radio Network.
Josh, looking forward to inviting you back on the program. Thanks again, Josh. Ladies and gentlemen, Josh Reeves.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
So there's a guy, an average American, just like me, just like you, just like any person that you see on the street, that has dedicated now 13 years to researching and getting at alternative views, right? And so all that really is, and you can see the knowledge that he's gained and what he possesses and the views. Likely most of the things that he said are things that you have never taken into consideration. Should you take those things into consideration? I admonish that you do. Because it seems as the years go by and as the presidents go by, the government and the country that we all enjoy, speaking of the United States, or for that matter, any of the Western world countries, Great Britain, Ireland, Canada, and right now we are enjoying, for the most part, a global peace. Okay, but what we've got in the White House is not seemingly peaceful. Okay, diplomacy is a wonderful thing, isn't it? And not taking sides politically, because nobody is perfect and nobody's policies are perfect. So there's good and bad to every situation and every angle. But if you get past the Oval Office, there are strings, like a puppet. Okay, he's got an office on Columbus. I think it's Columbus Street. In San Francisco. I can't think of his name. Godfather. Francis Ford Coppola. Just like his, now whether he designed it or not, but just like his logo of the Godfather, he's controlling his people below him like a puppet. And don't think for a second that you are not able to at least question and think, is the person in the Oval Office behind that desk, is he being controlled like a puppet? Because as I sat in Miami Beach, as I sat in that town hall meeting with my late friend, what I heard and what I saw was that mayor being completely controlled like a puppet by Rick Scott and the CDC. So who are the players? Who are the players above them? Who are the players above them? If you caught former episode, it's been it was January 2nd. Jordan Maxwell, who is an alternative views thinker, just like David Icke. Both gentlemen have joined the program. You can find links to both of those episodes at iantrottier.com. Maxwell has been studying alternative views, if you will, for decades. He's 80 years old now, and he's been studying it for 61 years. And if you hear that, listen to that episode. I asked him. I says, was Fidel Castro a Jesuit puppet? And his response was absolutely. So in the large scheme of things, yes, the United States is a rich, powerful, secure nation. We enjoy liberties in this country that no other civilization has enjoyed in the existence of mankind. Okay? This is an exceptional country, and we want to keep it that way, don't we? And not only do we want to keep it that way, but we want to continue without violence to help other people around the globe that don't have those same liberties, if you will, to enjoy those things, okay? Right. All right, so January 29th, this has been another discussion of truth. I'm going to take a short break, and I'll close out the program after this. Seek and Destroy. I play that song. I've been playing it now for a couple years to intro the show and oftentimes to close it out with as well. Seek and destroy anything that's corrupt in your path, in your community, in your family, in your school, in your governance, in your corporation, anything in your business. Seek it out and destroy it, right? That's why we name this show Discussions of Truth, because we aim to get at the truth, and anything that is not, to seek it out and destroy it. Now, getting into black magic and theory, especially religious theory, those are points, political theory even, those are points that this program avoids. Because, yes, certainly there's things that are unexplainable. Not a single human being on this planet knows exactly, or knows how, and really any idea how the universe was created. Okay, so that's one thing that our brains cannot understand, cannot conceptualize. We can try, but we certainly don't have an answer. So we being members of the race, human beings, we look for religion to answer that question. Okay, we don't get into that on this program. What we look at are facts, okay? Or at least what we understand to be facts. All right, so April 15th, remember Gerald Posner. And I tied that in for you. I mean, that's an incredible tie. You tie in INSIS. Okay, pardon that. You tie an INSIS. You tie INSIS into Acorn, I believe it's called. Acorn, the pharmaceutical. Both pharmaceuticals are owned by the same guy, John Kapoor. That's Kapoor. All right. And then you tie high-tech pharmaceuticals, which is like they make workout drinks and products. I know those things well. Protein powders and that nature, those things of that nature. High-tech pharmaceuticals is owned by Acorn. Let me just see if I get that right. Forgive me if I have got that wrong. My notes. Okay. All right. John Kapoor. That's really the only name you need to remember is John Kapoor. That's Kapoor. Okay. His wife is deceased now. He's now in prison. That's as of like the last 10, 15 days. All right. This is all stuff that comes up in Posner's book in Pharma. Okay, he'll be joining the program May 20th, and it relates high-tech. Kobe Bryant had a lawsuit going against high-tech. Is it a coincidence? How much was he worth? I don't know. Was he worth $400 million, Bryant? Okay. And how much is this Kapoor worth? Is it a money battle? Was it coincidence? Just ask yourself the question. Was it coincidence that Bryant's helicopter went down Sunday, the day after tweeting a very classy tweet to LeBron James with the hashtag 33466? And you can get into gematria if you want, but is it a coincidence? Is it a coincidence the Comedy Channel in 2017 had aired a program in Chamberlain Heights about Bryant's death? Not necessarily death, because he didn't die in that episode, to what I understand. But his helicopter goes down. Okay, his helicopter crashes. Are these coincidences? I don't know. I don't believe in coincidences. All right. Pardon me. March 25th, A. Ralph Epperson. Okay, El Nuevo Orden Mundial. Sabotage, which I've got sitting right in front of me. Anastasia Nesvetelova. University of London. That's March 18th. William Blunden, San Francisco State University, Rootkit Arsenal. Escape and Evasion of the Dark Corners of the System. That'll be joining March 11th. His other book of note would be Behold a Pale Farce, Cyber War, Threat Inflation, yes, and the Malware Industrial Complex. Not the military industrial complex, the Malware Industrial Complex. Okay, and Kevin Shipp. All right, Kevin Shipp, another former high-ranking CIA agent. John Kiriaku's been on the program twice. John Kiriaku is he basically busted Bush in the Bush administration for torturing people at Guantanamo. Okay, Kevin Shipp would be joining the program March 4th. Bandy Lee, author of New York Times bestselling book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. Okay, World Mental Health Coalition president. Currently at Yale University. She'll be joining the program February 19th. Kevin Annett, Murder by Decree, a crime of genocide in Canada. And next week, he's a publisher, investigative journalist, controversial, credible, courageous. The editor-in-chief and founder of nonprofit news organization WhoWhatWhy.com. He's a native of California. Russ is a BA in political science from UCLA and an MA from Columbia School of Journalism. He's a former contributing editor of Columbia Journal Review. In his 25-plus year career, Baker has written for a variety of publications, including New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker, Washington Post, Esquire, Vanity Fair, and Village Voice. By Bill Moyers, he's quoted as, "She seemed unimpressive, with conventional wisdom, quickly spotted and dismissed spin, and wasn't intimidated by the powers that be." Russ Baker will be joining the program February 5th. Baker is author, that's 2 weeks, author of 2008 book Family of Secrets, which raises uncomfortable questions about the Bush family and their careers and relationships outside of politics and presents evidence of connections between President H.W. Bush and individuals involved with the Watergate scandal and the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. That is next week. Okay, so next week, Russ Baker joins the program, and until then, thanks for listening. Contribute to the program I am, I fund myself because I know this information needs to get out there. So you can donate at iantrottier.com. You can donate at stopmassmedia.com, or you can also donate at impeachmassmedia.com. Buy a t-shirt, impeachmassmedia.com. So, until next week, thanks for listening, and be awesome.